Well, here we are anchored off another beautiful isolated island. More white sand beaches, more palm trees. But in this episode, we're going to share more of what we do on Florence to get here. Specifically, how we use the biggest and most difficult to handle sail on Florence.
In this video, we're going to share with you how we use our asymmetric spinnaker from the hoist right through to the drop, and some of the tips and tricks that we've used to make it easier. We've been sailing around the world for 4.5 years now, and our asymmetric spinnaker is our favourite sail. But many cruisers find sailing with a spinnaker so much of a challenge that they don't use it, which we think is a real shame. So we thought we'd share some of the tips and tricks that we've learned to make using this sail much easier and more effective.
Ready?
We have been racing dinghies and yachts for over 25 years, but we have now converted to being cruising sailors on Florence, our Oyster Heritage 37.
We hope that this video will inspire more cruising sailors to start using their asymmetric spinnaker and to use it more effectively in a wider range of wind angles.
Love it!
We'll start with the hoist.
So we've got three lines that control the spinnaker. We've got the halyard that pulls it up, and then we've got the tack line which pulls the tack of the spinnaker down to the bow, which we just clip on. So our tack line just leads to the front of the boat, and we've got a block right on the front of the boat on the bow roller there that it goes through, and then it comes through and we just tie it off around the Samson post here. And then we've got the clew of the spinnaker which we tie onto the sheet, and the sheet runs all the way back to the back of the boat where we control it on a winch in the cockpit. And we actually attach this by just tying a bowline, because the clew of the spinnaker can flap around a bit and we don't want any extra lumps of metal on there that are going to flap around and hit things. Rolly tasker sails handily come with the corners labelled, so you don't have the embarrassment of accidentally flying your spinnaker back to front. And we find it's a really good idea to tie the two corners on before you get the rest of the spinnaker out of the bag, just in case something goes wrong and it goes over the side. At least then it's attached.
The first tip is to bear away to a wind angle of about 160 degrees and let the mainsail all the way out before putting the spinnaker up. This reduces the apparent wind and means that when we hoist the spinnaker, it will go up into the wind shadow created by the mainsail, so the wind cannot pull it out of our grasp.
For the hoist, one of us feeds the spinnaker out while the other pulls on the halyard. Communication helps, and the person feeding the sail out can tell the hoister how far there is to go and when the spinnaker reaches the top of the mast.
Once the spinnaker is hoisted in the sock, we head up to a wind angle of 120 degrees, ready to raise the sock and deploy the spinnaker. This wind angle means that the spinnaker will fill as the sock is raised without flapping around and getting tangled.
As the person on the bow pulls the line to raise the sock, the person in the cockpit pulls on the sheet to set the spinnaker.
Now we tie off the sock line to a bow cleat to stop it flapping around, and we can steer the course we want and set the spinnaker to that course.
To trim the spinnaker to the right position, let the sheet out slowly until the front edge just starts to curl. This is the perfect racing setup, but for cruising we tend to pull in a bit more sheet so that it doesn't curl, and this means that the spinnaker doesn't flap when the autopilot wanders about in the waves.
On Florence we find that our asymmetric spinnaker works well from wind angles just forward of the beam back to an apparent wind angle of around 120 degrees.
But sailing lower than 120 degrees causes the spinnaker to become unstable and collapse. This is due to it being hidden in the wind shadow of the mainsail.
If we want to bear away past 120 degrees, then there is an easy trick to keep the spinnaker flying. But this is a trick we hardly ever see any other cruising boats doing. We use the spinnaker pole to pull the asymmetric spinnaker around out of the wind shadow of the mainsail.
So this is how we set up our spinnaker pole for use with our asymmetric spinnaker. We set the pole as low as possible on the mast, and that's so that the tack is as low as it would usually be if it was set on the bow roller. And then we have 3 lines that control the pole and keep it very stable. So we have a new rope which we've attached here called the guy, which runs through the jaws of the spinnaker pole and attaches to the tack line here. We run the guy back to a block about halfway down the boat, and then to another block at the same place as the spinnaker sheet, which we then run into a winch. And then this is the pole up, which attaches to the end of the spinnaker pole, and between those 3 lines it keeps the spinnaker pole nice and steady. We actually mark our spinnaker pole up hole so that we always get the pole horizontal when we first put it up, but our mark's worn off, so this is a good opportunity to redo it.
We put the spinnaker pole out after we have already got the spinnaker flying on the bow.
To transfer the spinnaker from the bow onto the spinnaker pole, one of us eases the tack line out, whilst the other winds in the guy so that the tack of the spinnaker moves smoothly from the bow to the spinnaker pole.
We can then set the angle of the pole to whatever we want by easing out or pulling in on the guy and the tack line.
Flying the tack of the spinnaker from the spinnaker pole in this way allows us to get down to around 155-degree wind angle. If we want to sail lower than that, then we would take the spinnaker down and pull out the clew of the gennaker instead, to run goose winged.
Sometimes when using the spinnaker on the pole like this, in light winds, the waves rocking the boat can make the spinnaker unstable, so we add a tweaker line to the sheet. A snatch block like this is the easiest way to set this up.
The tweaker pulls down on the sheet at a point further forward on the boat, pulling down on the back edge of the spinnaker and allowing us more control of its shape. This stabilises the movement of the sail. The spinnaker drop is where it often goes wrong for people. The spinnaker is the biggest sail on the boat, and because it's only attached by 3 corners rather than all the way along one edge like the other sails on the boat, it can create a very big mess very quickly. But there are some tips that will make the drop simple and straightforward.
The first tip is to keep a really good look on the horizon for any black clouds or squalls that might be approaching, and take the spinnaker down early so they don't cause a problem. On Florence we have a couple of limits which we stick to. We only put the spinnaker up if we have less than 15 knots apparent wind, and we always try to take it down before the apparent wind reaches 20 knots. That said, we have been caught out in the past, and once we got caught out in 25 plus knots of wind in pitch blackness, and we were surfing down waves at 9 knots, and then we had to go up on the bow and take the spinnaker down. Now that's pretty tricky conditions. We got caught out. It was my fault. I should have called it a bit earlier, but what we're going to share with you now, the process makes even getting the spinnaker down in those conditions simple and easy.
If we are sailing with the spinnaker on the pole, then we steer to an angle of 120 and transfer the tack of the spinnaker back to the bow by doing the reverse of the process to put it onto the pole.
Then, to make the drop simple and easy, we follow these key steps. Bear away to a wind angle of around 160 degrees to hide the spinnaker from the wind behind the mainsail.
By hiding the spinnaker behind the main and letting the sheet off completely, there should be no air in the spinnaker, making the person on the bow's job easier to pull down on the sock.
So this is probably the best tip of them all. We've never seen any other boats doing it this way, but this really transforms and makes the dropping the spinnaker much more easy. So instead of this line, which is the one that comes down from the sock on the spinnaker flapping around in the breeze, and when you're pulling down on it, if the spinnaker gets a big gust, it can try and pull you off the foredeck. We take that line and we run it through this ratchet block. It's an auto ratchet block here, which we've just looped around the cleat on the foredeck. And instead of being pulled up and off the deck, you get pulled down more into the block. But because it's a ratchet block, it can't pull you in, and you're just much more stable. It makes the whole process so much easier.
Once the spinnaker is safely in the sock, we use good communication to gradually ease the halyard down as the person on the bow pulls the spinnaker onto the deck. A general tip for all work outside of the cockpit is to sit down whenever possible. Sailing a monohull on the ocean can often be rolly and unstable. Sitting down makes you a much more stable platform and frees up the hand you would otherwise have to hang on with.
So in summary, our top tips for easy asymmetric spinnaker handling are:
steer to around 160 degrees apparent wind angle for the hoist and the drop to hide the spinnaker behind the mainsail and make your life easy.
use the spinnaker pole to pull the spinnaker out from the wind shadow of the mainsail so that you can sail lower angles downwind with an asymmetric spinnaker.
Use a tweaker on the sheet to gain more control of the asymmetric spinnaker's back edge and stabilise it when sailing lower wind angles.
Run the sock downhole through a ratchet block attached to the bow cleat or the tow rail so that the spinnaker cannot pull you off the foredeck during the drop. We love sailing with our spinnaker. It allows us to sail in light winds when we'd otherwise have to motor. It allows us to be faster in medium strength winds, and it also looks really good on camera. So we hope this video helped you and that we can see more of you on the water flying your spinnakers.
We want to say a huge thank you to everyone who supports us to make these videos possible, and especially to our star patrons.